Fairies, black, grey, green and white, you moonshine revellers and shades of night. Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp. Exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter and today is a fantasy folklore special focusing on fairies. Just what are fairies? Where do they come from? Where do they live? What do they eat? And just what exactly is glamour? In today's episode, we hope to answer those questions and more as we take a look at the little people known as fairies. The words fae and fairy come from the French and started to replace the Old English word elf during the Tudor period. English poet Edmund Spenser and playwright William Shakespeare helped popularise this change. Elfland and fairyland, elf and fairy were and still are interchangeable words. But what of the origins of these good folk? Shrouded in mystery and constant fascination of humans worldwide, fairies seem to have many origins. In Norse mythology, it is claimed that maggots emerging from the giant Ymir transformed into dark elves and light elves. Light elves took to the skies and were happy, benign creatures, whereas dark elves took to the underground domains and were evil and mischievous. It is said, in Italy, faerie is known as fate, and when the Roman civilization spread throughout other countries, the fate went along with them and settled in those territories too. In France, the name fate was corrupted to fae, and when the Romans invaded Britain, they took the fae with them, and they settled there too. And for centuries, the word fae was used, until the country folk changed it to faerie. But in Iceland, it is claimed that Eve was washing her children down by the river when God spoke to her. In awe and fear, she hid those children she had not yet washed from God. And when God asked her, "Are all of her children there?" she replied that they were. He then declared those children that she had hidden from him would now be hidden from humankind. Those children were changed into elves or fairies and were known as Hudrafolk in Scandinavian countries. While in other countries, fairies are believed to be creatures that are not quite good enough to get into heaven or quite evil enough to get into hell. These fairies are thought to be fallen angels or the heathen dead, compelled to live forever in between, in the twilight regions, the Middle Kingdom. So where do fairies live? The exact habitat of fairies differs. Some say they live in fairyland, but where is that? Fairyland is elusive. Some say that you can see it just over the horizon, while others claim it's just beneath our feet. Yet there has been times when fairyland was thought to be an actual geographical area, though this has tended to move from place to place. Yet others believe that fairyland doesn't even exist and that fairies coexist in our own world. But if this is true, where in our world do they inhabit? Well, that depends on which of the two distinct species of fairy we mean, the troop fairy or the solitary fairy. Troop fairies are groups of fairies that live in earthworks, forts and barrows, which prehistoric tribes erected as forts or for their dead chieftains. Troop fairy society is matriarchal, with each troop being ruled by a queen fairy. and the entire fairy race being governed by Queen Titania and Prince Oberon. Solitary fairies, on the other hand, live alone and try to avoid large gatherings. There are many types of solitary fairy, such as banshee, leprechaun, brownie, and puka. Fairies have a natural magic called glamour, and it is this glamour that gives them the ability to render themselves visible or invisible at will. They can simultaneously appear visible to one person and yet invisible to another. However, there are exceptions, as most fairy sightings take place at noon when the sun is at its zenith, or at midnight, or alternatively, even in the twilight hours, say just before sunrise or even at sunset, all of which mark the transition from light to dark and vice versa. If you are lucky enough to catch a glimpse of the fairy folk, what can you expect to see? Well, we shouldn't really generalise, but most eyewitnesses observe that they wear green coats or dresses with red caps, sometimes with the addition of an owl's white feather. Most fairies, whatever their kind, are characterised by some sort of deformity that marks them out as different. If you were to look closely, you may see webbed feet, feet that are on back to front, goat's hooves, noses without any nostrils, pendulous breasts, cow's tails, and even squint eyes. The commonly known pointed ears is also a telltale sign that fairy folk are about. Fairies have the ability to change their shape and their appearance at will. Shape-shifting means they can make themselves huge in size or as small as a grain of sand. Through shape-shifting, fairies can assume any guise they wish. It's even believed that some fairies have enough power to change the size and appearance of other fairies, and also that of humans. Why they'd want to do this isn't exactly understood, although some claim it's so that they can join in human festivities and change themselves to look exactly like humans. Other magical abilities include the power of horizontal and vertical levitation, so the need for fairy wings isn't necessary, nor is the use of a magical wand. They also have the means of instantaneous transport, and just before leaving a place, a fairy can often be heard to utter the words horse and hattock or some other magical saying. They may even include a destination as well, and brave mortals can also tag along for the ride if they are brave enough and say the exact phrase. But be warned, if you do attempt this, you may end up in some unusual places. The common belief is that fairies are vegetarians and that they enjoy a wide and varied diet of honey, cheese, eggs from many birds, blueberries, berries, and also garden produce of all varieties. And like most humans, they are particularly fond of cake. There is disagreement, however, as to whether or not they like cow's milk. Some say that it is too thick for their tastes, opting to drink dew or spring water instead. It is also claimed that every now and again they like to distill the nectar of blossoms, while others say that it is intoxicating enough just to be a fairy. Music is tremendously important to fairy folk. Their musicians have a magical skill. And many of the songs that we know today in our world actually originate in the fairy realm. They are passionate about music, and human musicians are particularly at risk for being lured into the fairy realm for their talent. Their melodies are known to be beautiful yet wild, and have a fatal charm to the human ear. Their wistful tunes may render the listener into a fatal sleep. Fairies' love of music also extends to dancing. They often jig in circles, which are known as fairy rings. Now this can prove fatal for a human passer-by. The wild enchantment of the dance can lure a human into the ring, and like a fairy kiss, music can captivate that human forever in the fairy world. This can be a devastating event. If a human steps into a fairy ring, they are compelled to join the fairies in their wild prancing. This might seem like a moment, or even an hour or two. Or, at most, it might feel like you've been dancing the whole night. But in our world, in our reality, it will actually be several years, sometimes longer. There are various ways that you can protect yourself from the glamour and the tricks of the fairy folk. Wary country people have devised ingenious methods to discourage the more malevolent of the small ones. If you turn clothes inside out, a glove for example, and throw that into a fairy ring, that is sure to dispel the revellers. Other such items include the Holy Bible, iron such as keys, and open scissors. Also, there's a plant called St. John's wort that should do the trick as well. Fairies aren't good or bad. Like humans, they are a complex creature that vary in mood and temperament. On the whole, they are genial and festive, and really only desire to be left alone to enjoy their customs and traditions that they have fostered over many centuries. Their more sinister aspects are only really brought out by the stupidity and brutality of humans. So remember, if you hear a joyful melody on the wisps of the wind, or catch a glimpse of red and green out of the corner of your eye, you may fall foul of the fairy folk. So it might serve you to leave a small gift for them as you go about your day.